All right. Let me just make sure that we're back on again. Yes. All right. So we're back on. Okay. So I had asked you to give some tips on how to connect with your children in 5 minutes or less.
Okay. So it's really important, in my opinion, to connect more than once a day. Well, how do you do that without giving a big block of time? So normally, the points of contention that we have as a family every day really are our points of connection. Getting up and getting dressed, chores, kids going off to school or whatever transitions happen in the day, in the car going places, sitting down for a meal, getting ready and going to bed. Yeah, all the moms are sitting there going, those are the most trouble with my kids. Yes. And if we can just adjust the way we think about these things, they become points of connection rather than points of contention. Not all the time, because you're going to have your days, but on a good day. So let's take transitions, for example. It's one we never think about. But if your child goes to school, they get up in the morning and at some point they have to leave. And a lot of moms, and I've been one of them, will say, okay, come on, you gotta go, get your bag, don't forget your lunch. Da, 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 da. You open the door and say, don't be late. But what instead is this? So I did this just this morning, at least 2 days a week, if not more. I'm in charge of getting my grandkids out of the house to school. So this morning I'm standing by the door and my 2 grandsons are dawdling and I'm patiently standing there and I'm saying, it'd be good if you weren't late. I hope you're not going to be late. Ben, you need your shoes. And pretty soon they come and Ben comes to the door and I say, do you have your lunch? Yes. Do you have your backpack? Yes. Okay. Well, I love you. And he threw his arms around my waist and then he went out the door. And my older grandson, who is 12, saw me hug Ben. We do this, you can't hug me ritual numerous times. And he came to the door and I said, have a good day at school. I love you, Jack. And he kind of moved away like, I'm not hugging you. And he went out and I said to him, you know, Jack, the day will come when you're going to want to hug. And he turned, smiled, and then he went off to school. Did with both of those boys this morning. It took all of 3 minutes.
Wow.
3 to 5 minutes. That's all it took. So all the time I stood at the door. And I was kind of rough. So I'm kind of stern. A little bit. And they had to feed and water the chickens this morning and they were not getting it done. And so I made them turn off their TV and their technology and they had to pick up their shoes and put away their dirty clothes. Whenever I'm in charge, I have this little list. It's on the table. They have to check it off. And so I'm doing all that with them this morning and they don't like it. And I'm calm, but I'm firm. Well, you got to do it. We're going to go out and we're going to break the ice and you got to feed those chickens and that's just how it is. And so that moment at the door was really important because they didn't go to school feeling frustrated because grandma's so bossy. Because, you know, we got things that have to be done in the morning and when I'm in charge, they get done. So that's a transition moment. When they come home, lots of times, this happened to me a bazillion times as a kid. I'd come in the house, I'd bang the door, I'd say, Mom, I'm home. And she'd say, okay. But what if she stopped and came out of wherever she was, whether it was washing dishes, folding laundry, wherever it was, and said, I'm so glad you're home, and looked at me. That takes all of 30 seconds.
Right.
But as a kid, it says, I hear you, I see you, you matter to me. It's a connection. 30 seconds, it's all it takes. Let's take bedtime, for example. I love the section on bedtime in the book. We think about bedtime as this is, I got to get all these, you know, the clothes laid out, the teeth brushed, whatever it is we do, fill the backpacks, or maybe it's just get them to bed so I can get to my favorite TV program. And the whole goal is to get them to bed. But what if you thought about bedtime not as sleeping at all, but as a time to connect? And I tell people, get a timer. If this kind of freaks you out, get a timer. It'll take a while because your kids don't really trust you. Because parents say a ton of things and they don't follow through. They have very little consistency. And until your kids trust you, you will always struggle. So when you start this new bedtime thing, you say, okay, we need to get to bed. And you're going through that whole routine and it feels a little harried and stressful because it just is. Once they're in bed, you come in, you set your little timer and you say, we have 3 minutes. How was school today? What was the best thing that happened? What was the worst thing that happened? When the timer goes off, you're free. Now, because they don't trust you when you first start this, they say, I want to talk some more, don't start. And that whole thing happens. You say, well, it's a good thing we're going to do this again tomorrow. So I have 2 grandkids. They're horrible to put to bed. I was with their parents for a few months in the fall. And they go to bed and then they spend the next half an hour to an hour hollering to their parents, I need a drink. So-and-so's pulling my hair. She's touching me. They sleep in bunk beds and one will lean over the side and reach down. And you know exactly what it's like. Even with one, it's just that whole thing. So when I got there, I would take my book in there with me and I would turn off the lights and I would say, now it's time for bed. And that means, Elliot, that our head has to stay on the pillow. Now I might have to tell him 20 times, oh, Elliot, is your head on the pillow? And calm is your friend. If you can stay calm there, that's calm is your best friend. And then I asked 3 questions and I'd say, oh, let's start with, Elliot, we'll start with you tonight. What is the best thing that happened today? And then we talk about that. What is the worst thing that happened today? Did anything bad or sad happen today? And sometimes there is, and sometimes they'll say no, and sometimes they'll say yes. Then we talk about that. And then I'll say, and what are you looking forward to most tomorrow?
Wow, nice.
And sometimes they can't think of anything. And I'll say, well, isn't this happening at school? Or don't you have a play date? I try to keep up on what's happening with them. And then I'll say, okay, now it's time for bed. And I sit right there because I was in the training mode. And I'd open my book. And then one of them would start talking and I'd say, shh, shh. No talking. Shh, no talking. I must have had to say that 50 times. The first few times we did it. But then they got it down and they knew grandma's coming in. We're going to do these 3 questions. She's going to sit here for 5 minutes and read her book. And we're going to go to sleep. And that's what happened.
Wow.
And it's peaceful and nice. Would it be cool at the end of a long day if I could just put them in their beds, turn off the light, and walk out? Yeah. But what I did, the 5 minutes that I give them, sometimes it might take 6 or 7, it never takes 10, saves me from an hour of saying, no, stay in bed, you're done, go to sleep, and finally getting mad. Is what their routine was. So when their parents noticed this and they commented on it, and I said, well, you have a system and this is your system. The kids go to bed and then they holler at you for an hour and you holler back and do that. And then you go upstairs and really rail on them and then they go to sleep.
Right.
That's your system. If you don't like it, you have to change it. But that's a connection point. It's less than 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And you don't have to do it every night. What if you said, we're going to do this on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday? Or I can only do this with you on Saturday and Sunday. But if they get it consistently pretty much every Saturday and Sunday, it will be enough. It will be enough.
Wow.
Same with meal times. I don't know about you, but I had 7 kids around my table at mealtime. That's a lot of, he touched me. She's bringing food and spilled milk. But the reality of it is like this. I say to parents, okay, you want to have a mini conversation if you can. And that means that you say, you know what I saw on the way home from work today? There was this sign and it said this. Is that the silliest thing you ever heard? And then you just be quiet and you just go. And it might last 30 seconds and it might last 10 minutes. And in that 30 seconds or that 10 minutes, somebody is going to say, stop touching me. And somebody is going to spill their milk. That's just how it's going to be. But when it's over, you say, oh, for 30 seconds, we talked about this. Yes, good on us. Or we actually had a conversation about this. Yes, good on us. It counts because you write that down. You ask a question. Whatever happened, happened. And it's a connection moment. You're looking at your kids. You're not yelling about milk. You're not saying, eat your beans. And nobody's trying to get away from the table as fast as they can. Well, that's not true. Your kids want to get away from the table. And that's just the way it is. But if you have, 3 to 5 minutes of time at the table together where you're looking at them and you're calm, it's connection and it counts. And it will count. That's just a couple of them. So when I was writing my book, I reached out to my kids and I said, what are your best memories? One of my kids said, meal times. Meal times are chaotic.
Wow.
They were consistent. And we did talk a little. It was super consistent and it mattered to one. I was a great reader, but I wasn't consistently a good reader to my kids. But I had kind of a haphazard system and we did reading. And one of my kids said, the thing that mattered the most to her was that I always read to them. That's the word that just blew my mind. You always read to us. No, that is not. That's what she took away from that inconsistent, messy system I had about reading. It mattered to her. And that's the thing about relationships. If you can do anything even remotely consistently for small blocks of time throughout your day, it is going to be enough. It will hold your children to you. We had 4 kids on drugs. We didn't lose any of them because they kept coming home. One of my daughters who was on drugs, when she got out of rehab, so she was like 17 years old, she wrote me a letter. It's in the book. And she said, Mom, I know you feel like a failure, but I want you to know that home feels like a temple to me. When life is really hard and I don't know what to do, I come home.
Aww.
And so it isn't the big things that are going to matter, that are going to make you successful as a parent. It's all these nasty little annoying things I'm talking about here. If someone's assigned to do the dishes, I know you want them to go in there and do the darn dishes. It's their job. But you know what it's like to face the kitchen alone. It's depressing. But what if you went in there just for 1 minute and stood by them and rinsed for just 1 minute and said, hey, I know you're doing this tomorrow. How are you feeling about that? Or I saw that whatever you know about them, doesn't have to be deep or important. And you engage in 1 minute of conversation and you say, thanks for doing the dishes, and you go do your thing. And you have connected for 1 minute and their chore of doing the dishes is a little less annoying. Might even do a better job. You see what I'm saying here? Does it make sense?
Yes, because I think that one of the pressures that I put on myself is that it has to be big blocks of time, right? It has to be a night out and it has to be, hours and hours of playing or whatever it is. And, knowing that even like for like in your example, right, you had 7 kids to raise, and it's those little memories like mealtime, which you didn't say they were extravagant, right? They weren't like so
No, we were not having philosophical discussions. That wasn't happening.
yeah.
But we all sat down at the same time for at least 5 minutes. It counted.
Yeah,
You
that's
know, I
amazing.
reached out to all my daughters and son-in-laws too when I asked that question. And one of my daughter-in-laws, she said that every year they went to Disneyland. And she said, you know, one year we didn't go and I was so glad because what we did instead was we camped out. She said, I just wanted to be with my dad and talk to him. She said, Disneyland didn't impact me as much as laying on the grass with my dad looking at the stars.
Wow.
Yeah. So it isn't the big things that they're going to remember. And I have 7 proofs of that. And the in-laws. So then I even have more proofs. Not one single person and I queried all my cousins. I mean, anybody I could think of, not one person mentioned Disneyland, a trip to Hawaii, or any big thing, or a special toy they got. Not one.
Wow.
Talked about going to grandma's. They talked about homely family reunions. They talked about camping out. They talked about laying in the grass looking at the stars. They talked about their parent reading to them, eating together. That's what they remembered. That's what mattered.
Yeah, that's very interesting because we talked about this a little bit before the show, is that this is kind of a bigger topic, but one of the things is that for my daughter, because I came from like poor kind of family, with my daughter, I was very intent on giving her the opposite life, right? And so then it meant that we would go like on like big vacations, like we did the Disney thing and it was go big or go home type of thing. And we got like as much as we possibly could, like all the experiences we possibly could fit in. And when we got home, it was like, she didn't care about that. And then we went to medieval times, which is like to see horses and knights jousting, but it's all acted, right? And so she said that that was the best night of her life. And then later on we went to a hotel and we stayed at a hotel and we played in the pool. And she said that was the best vacation ever. And I was like, we did Disneyland for like $10,000, but the like $200 hotel was the best vacation ever. Like, right? So
and you have to ask yourself why. Why was time in a rented pool more valuable than rushing around Disneyland getting as much in as possible? Why?
right.
Because it was you and her and your dad and her dad
Right.
together. That's why. Kids measure how much you care, how much they matter by how often you look at them, by how often you hear them, by how often you connect with your eyes. So here's another example of a daily connection. I call these random touches. I love random touch because it doesn't even take 3 seconds. You're walking down the hall. Your child's coming one way, you're coming the other way. As you pass, you look them in the eye and smile. That's it. No words exchanged. For example, is your child sitting on the couch. You're busy doing your thing. You've passed through the living room a half a dozen times, but this time you stop, you sit down, you put your hand on their knee, unless they're a teenager, and then you got to watch their space, and you just sit close, and you sit there for a couple of 2 minutes watching what they're doing. Then you give them a pat and you leave. No words exchanged. You entered their space, you shared what they were sharing, and then you left. It's a connection moment. It works really well with teenagers.
Awesome. Allie's asking, what was the question you had asked? What was your poll question for your kids?
My what question?
Like the question you had asked them for the research for your book.
Oh, I asked them, what was the most memorable thing what is the thing you remember most from your childhood?
Mm. Interesting.
Yeah, one of my sons said, go walking with you to kindergarten. So he was the last of 6. There was a 7-year gap before number 7 came along. And I walked him to kindergarten every day. And if it was snowing, we cross-country skied to kindergarten. It was 4 blocks away. It didn't take much time out of my life. And I just did it and it was fun. And that's what he said.
Wow.
And so that was the question I asked is what do you remember most? What mattered the most?
I'm going to ask my daughter that tonight, just out of curiosity.
It's a fun question to ask.
Yeah. So when you have a bag analogy, and I think that it's so important to share because, we were talking a bit before the show, and one of the things that I was saying is that I have done healing work to kind of heal stuff from my past, my childhood, and my parents, like the stuff that they passed down. And then I realized that just because I've done this work, that doesn't mean it stops for my daughter. And so Marianne just has this really great bag analogy that's also in her book. And so I just wanted to share it.
And I'll go on your site today and post the meme with it so that if people want to read it, they can. I'm just going to paraphrase, but I believe that we're born with an empty bag. And as we grow, we fill the bag. We fill it with good things and we fill it with a lot of bad things. And we become the person we're meant to be as we empty the bag. Now, a lot of parents' goal is to somehow get their kids to 18 years old with an empty bag. But if you do that, then how do they grow? It's the act of emptying out the bag that makes us who we are. I was sexually abused as a child. I'll tell you, emptying that out of my bag it changed who I was. As I healed from that, and with the perpetrator who was deceased, as I did that work, well, I learned a lot about him. And I love him and I forgive him. And it changed who I was and it changed how I looked and approached the world. Would I go back and say, I wish that hadn't happened to me? It's a terrible thing to have happen, but I'm not sure that I would do that because much of what I am today is emptying that out of my bag. I was a rager at the first 10 or 15 years of my child rearing, I raged. It was challenging for my children. It was like living with an alcoholic and you never knew when I would come home drunk. You never knew when the explosion would happen. Wow. I realized that I did that because I had some things in my bag that were very painful. And as I emptied that bag and I gained control over that, I'm now able to help people in a way that I could never have helped them because I know it was an experience that changed me. How are my children faring now? They all get it. And they've done a lot of work on their own bags. We've been able to talk about some of these things. You cannot be a perfect parent. You cannot parent perfectly. Much of the reason moms especially carry shame is they have this idea that they can and they should. Even if you did it as perfectly as possible, trust me, your kids are going to have stuff in their bag. And it's going to blindside you. Like, I'll just give you an example. So my daughter, we were talking about name calling and I said, well, for all of my raging and all the stuff that I didn't do right, at least I never name called. And she said, yes, you did. You called us pigs. I said, what? When did that happen? And so she was explaining it to me. And I started laughing because I distinctly remembered, and I came down the stairs one day All 7 of my kids were sprawled in the living room with all their cups and their bowls and their chips and their shoes. And I said, this living room looks like a pig pen. And my daughter took that away. We're pig.
Wow. Yeah.
So there's a bag, and they're going to put stuff in their bag, and then they're going to have to work out their bag. Some of it is painful work on both sides. One day, my daughter came and asked me a question. She said, Mom, I've never told this before, Connie, and I'm not going to tell any details. It's far too painful, but I'm going to share this. She said, Mom, sometimes I feel like I want to hurt my kids and I don't know why. Well, I suffer from extremely severe postpartum depression and anxiety. We didn't even know what that was in my day. There were no helps and no resources at all. And during one of and they usually last 2 to 3 years for me. So that means that I was in postpartum depression for 18 years.
Wow.
You know, I had a kid every 2 or 3 years for a long time. And during one of those pregnancies, I was inappropriate with some children, not my own. And my daughter was only 3 at that time. And so when she asked me that, and I've done a lot of work on that since, you know, we all have some things in our lives that are pretty painful to remember. And I at that point had to own up and say, well, when we were in this place with these people, I did this. And it was like a light bulb went on for her, and her memory came on, and she said, oh, I remember. And she was able to take that out of her bag, and she doesn't feel that way anymore. She doesn't suffer from that anymore. And it was finally out of my bag, because we do have to sometimes confess. And so this work it can be challenging on both sides. And we would like to think that it would be better if we never had to do these kinds of things. But my daughter grew and I grew. And every time I take something out of my bag and look at it and heal it and discard it, I grow. And I'm able to help someone else do that work. Every time my children take something out of their bag and bring it to me, I think to myself, I wish I hadn't given them that.
Right.
They're unintentional, like the pig thing. And some are more intentional, like the inappropriate behavior thing. But I think to myself, as I watch my children do that work themselves and what it does for them, I don't allow shame, because I realize it's important work. I don't know if everyone would agree with this. Maybe there's someone who knows more than me out there who would say, well, that's not right. We need to know how to, you know, like I have one of my hashtags is better life skills, better parent. That's true. Mm-hmm. You can get yourself in order, the better you're going to parent. But I just promise you, it won't send your kids off with an empty bag. And you're not the only one putting stuff in their bag. There are grandparents and teachers and kids in school and friends and enemies. It's just part of life, filling the bag and emptying the bag. Now I'm going to end with a good story, because we want to end on a really happy note.
Yeah. I want to thank you for your vulnerability earlier. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I had 2 friends. They were twins. They were in their late 80s. They lived together. Both of their husbands were deceased. And they walked together every day, arm in arm. They were kind of tippy. They held each other up. And they would walk around the block. And one day I saw one of them walking alone, and she was tippy. And I went running out and I said, oh, hi, can I walk with you, Marion? And I linked arms, and I'm going to walk her home to make sure she gets there safe. And she's weeping. And I said, Marion, what's the problem? And she was telling me about a situation she was having with her sister. It stemmed from their past, some little thing they hadn't worked out together and they had been fighting about it. It shocked me so much. I stopped walking and I said, Marion, I thought by the time I was your age, I would have it all worked out. And then Marion started laughing and she said, oh, honey, that's never happening. There's always stuff in the bag to work on.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
We're not broken. Our kids aren't broken. We just have a bag. Learning comes from the bag.
Right. And I think that a lot of parents think, at least I do, a lot of parents think like, am I going to screw them up for life?
I hear that is probably one of the most common things I hear in my own mentoring work. And yeah, you will in some ways. You'll put stuff in their bag. That's what that is. Will you destroy their lives? Most of us will not destroy our children's lives. I told you what our family was like by the time my oldest was 20. It was a mess. It looked like a wreck. We did not know if we would survive, but we did because we had done enough right. You just need to do enough right. Well, what did we do right? Well, we sat at the table and ate together. We went camping. We drove to grandma's. I taught them how to do chores and be responsible. We did enough right. Would you want to have lived in our family? You know what? So I've never said this before either, because I didn't know until recently. But I've been getting some comments on Facebook, some of my posts from kids who grew up with my kids. Some of them used drugs. Some came from single parent families. Some of them, I'm sure, knew some of the struggles we were having in our own home. And they say, I remember how much I loved coming to your house. Well, it's imperfections. Because we did enough right. We did enough right. And that's really the goal, to heal ourselves, to improve ourselves, to work on our own character, to have influence with our children, and to have as much good influence as we can, and then to let them empty their bag and grow.
Right. Thank you. This was amazing. Where can people find you?
So I have a website, MarianneJohnsonCoach.com. I post an article there every single Sunday. They can get a free chapter of the book, the chapter on touch points, those points of connection that should be points of contention that should be points of connection. And that's becomingapresentparent.com. And you can find me on Facebook under Marianne Johnson. It should come up.
Awesome. Thank you very much for being here.
You bet. Thank you so much. It was fun.
And thank you for everyone that's watching.